Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Set Listening Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. We are getting off the Bruce train tonight, though I'm sure he will come up, as he often does. And I'm talking to a writer and someone who is in the middle of doing a Kickstarter. So, Paige, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me. We're getting
Yeah.
off the Bruce train and we're hopping on the Mothman train.
Tell us a little about yourself.
Hi, my name's Paige. I turned 35 this week.
Birthday.
Thanks. I love telling stories about monsters, misfits, people falling in love. And yeah, we've been doing this Kickstarter because my cozy monster romance series, Mothman and Love, just wrapped in December. And so to celebrate, we have this really gorgeous special edition. And we launched it 2 days ago. And in 2 days, we are already about halfway to our goal, which has been really exciting.
We're going to include a link to the Kickstarter in the show notes, but I always like to start at the beginning, which is a very good place to start, as they say in Sound of Music.
I love the Sound of Music.
Yes.
My
Where did you grow up, and what kind of music was your family listening to?
gosh, I grew up in Michigan, and I'm thinking about being at my grandparents' house with all of my cousins gathered around their tiny TV watching musicals. And we would all watch The Sound of Music and we would watch My Fair Lady just like on repeat. If all the cousins were at grandma and grandpa's, it was one of those movies that was on. And goodness, I rewatched The Sound of Music as an adult, and the chemistry is out of this world. Talk about an enemies to lovers. Oh, it's such a good dynamic when, as a romance author, just studying that. But when we're thinking about music that we were listening in, so the car growing up around the house, my parents were like 80s punk rockers. So it was a lot of The Cure, it was a lot of The Smiths, Susie and the Banshees, which was a lot of fun. Definitely informed my music taste and my fashion taste too.
I'm going to go back to this for a minute. I am a lover of Hallmark movies, Christmas
Mhm.
movies, and the movies, and I embrace the corniness of them, and I have the bingo card, and I have the tropes, and I understand all this in there, right? But it is something about bubblegum for the mind, right?
Mhm.
And then when I love hard mystery novels and science fiction, but I go through a fair amount of romance novels as well. And I had not thought about the Sound of Music being that trope, right?
Oh my God, it's incredible. And like that scene where they're dancing together and you
Yes.
just see that spark is just such an iconic moment. But yeah, it's really, I never realized watching it as a kid, like what a romance that movie is.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Hallmark. Hallmark movies were actually, and I know we're going to talk more about it later, but
Yeah.
one of the big inspirations for the Mothman series. I really wanted to do something that felt cheesy, that felt Hallmarky, and like that sweet romance for people who loved monsters and Halloween and spooky stuff.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, and we'll often talk about where you'll hear the guys, you'll have podcasts that are talking about Hallmark movies, or we'll talk about TV shows and we'll talk about chemistry. And there is something about that Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer. When my wife and I were dating, she once sent me the lyrics to I Must Have Done Something Good to and I thought that was just one of the sweetest things ever
That's so cute.
because that is a great song. And that, yeah, this we could spend a whole hour talking about Sound of Music.
It's a Julie Andrews podcast now.
Yes, it
Sorry,
is.
everyone.
And I remember when we rented Princess Diary, and
Mhm.
there's Julie Andrews, and you're just like, is she just the coolest thing ever?
She's so cool. I love her in interviews too because she's so down to earth.
Yeah.
There was one, I think she was on Stephen Colbert just talking about being a grandma, just really casual. You could really imagine like she's just someone that you could just hang out with.
You mentioned that your 80s punk influenced your music and your mode of dress. Tell me a little bit about that.
You
Are
wouldn't
there
know
embarrassing pictures
nowadays.
up there, Paige, out there?
Defined embarrassing because
I
I think fashion really goes in waves.
Yes.
Now looking at me, I'm very much in like that cottagey core,
Hmm.
vintagey, like adjacent, not as vintage as I used to be, but I
Yeah.
went through phases. It went very punky 80s to like anime girl with like
Ah,
bright, and then that went back into more of a goth phase.
okay.
And then I might be mixing up the things, but then I went very 1950s and then got into where I'm at now, where I feel like I like to blend all of the things.
Yeah.
And yeah, it feels very authentic. It's a little more playful. And I think with fashion, probably similar to any form of expression, you can get very much like you have to be a certain way. You don't want to mix this with that. But I think the more you have fun and you play with it, the more you get down to something that feels really unique and like a personal style.
Yeah, it really does. Did you grow up in a house full of readers?
I feel like we definitely watched a lot of movies, and my parents, they still are like huge James Patterson fans.
Okay.
Like I feel like they have every James Patterson book that exists. But my grandma and my mom read a lot of romance novels. They had the really cute attached apartment to us, so you could just always go right over my
Hmm.
grandparents' house, which was really sweet. But they would pass romance novels back and forth to each other. Oh, this one's really good. Oh, I just finished this one. And so, probably when I was too young, I started reading like historic romance because they were always reading them. And it was that thing of you can read it. If you have any questions, you can ask us. And yeah, it would be really interesting as an adult to revisit some of those because I haven't read them since.
So I remember junior high maybe getting a Harold Robinson novel that seemed so steamy. He wrote the Betsy, he did a lot of
Right.
novels. He is not someone you know about now, but he had just enough smut for this 13 and 14-year-old hormone guy,
You're
right?
like, oh my.
Yeah, the carpetbaggers and all this stuff. Yeah. And it was, and yeah, my parents always were just happy I was reading. They knew that's what brought me happiness, and I would bring everything. So you read historical fiction early, but yeah, romance, but were there early writers and series that really spoke to you, Paige?
I loved Anne Rice, and I still do. I think her writing is, there's so much texture to it, but she was someone that I just read over and over. I think Vittorio the Vampire was the one that I
Mhm.
probably read front to back so much as a teenager. I also really loved wacky, silly, like teen romance books. There was one, I cannot remember the author, but it was called Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging. And it was this British, like
What a
diary
great
style.
title.
I know they changed it for the US version, which I think is a shame, but it was just this like really silly diary style book with a lot of
Mhm.
hijinks, super wacky, and a similar, it would have been shelved similarly to The Princess Diaries, which I also read growing up. But I think that blend of reading a lot of romance, reading a lot of manga, I
Mhm.
read so much manga that it was frustrating for my parents because it was expensive. You had to start going to the library because I would just get through it in an afternoon.
Mine
But
was
yeah.
I read a lot of comic books. The problem was I just ripped through them. You'd buy 10 comic books, and that's an afternoon. That isn't even,
Mhm.
they're thinking, we just bought you. Shouldn't that last you a week? No, not
That
at
last
all. Did you know you wanted to be a writer early?
I think so. I didn't really know how much of an option it would be. Like everyone always says, have a backup plan, that sort of thing.
Right.
I knew I wanted to do storytelling in some capacity. So I did a lot of songwriting. I still write songs. No one looks at them. They're hidden away on my Google Docs where, but it's like a
Okay.
stress relief where I'll just write lyrics sometimes. I've always been writing stories, just like filling up notebooks with things since I was a kid, like even just like drawing things and making little books and stuff. So I always knew I wanted to do storytelling, and I did web comics for a long time, and it was, I think, well, it was the National Novel Writing Month that got me to finish my first draft of a novel. And once I did that, I went, oh, like there's no going back.
Hmm.
Like I had done some short stories, but it was my first time ever finishing something. And I think finishing my first novel made me go, oh, I need to keep doing this. This is what I want to be doing. And I really haven't stopped since.
Do you do this full time?
I do now. Yeah. I would say I am not the breadwinner of the household, but this is my job now, which is cool.
You talked a little bit about Anne Rice and why and I guess this is a good time. Talk about your Mothman series. Talk about
Sure.
why. Yeah, I love the. By the way, I just read somewhere today that they are going to go forward with a new Buffy series.
Oh, I loved Buffy. I watched a
Yeah,
ton of.
and they're hoping it'll be a pilot. I posted on Facebook that there was a time, and pardon if I'm controversy for just a minute, that if I had saw that there was going to be a Buffy reboot without Josh Whedon, I would have been depressed. And now I find myself ecstatic that he has nothing to do with it.
He's not.
Yes, Sarah Michelle Gellar is.
Oh, cool. I love
Yeah,
that.
I remember loving that series and
Yeah, I
just
did
how
too.
they played with it and just all the different fun tropes and things like that.
I loved the movie too. I haven't seen that in forever, but
Yeah,
it was a
see.
fun movie. It was cute.
Yeah, it
I
was.
I think that we had, and I was talking about this with someone recently, where I feel like the 80s, but I'm thinking particularly the 90s, were Disney Channel original movies and
Yeah.
even some series like the Bailey School Kids. And I
Nice.
think that growing up with that probably really influenced me because as an adult, I really craved funny, less serious, almost contemporary feeling paranormal stuff.
Hmm.
And it was the pandemic where I was a little stir crazy
Sure.
and thinking about escaping into the woods where there are no expectations and you're in the wilderness and everything
Yeah.
is like nature and whatever. And so I started thinking about this character and what if you ran off to the woods and Mothman landed on your roof and you had to nurse him back to health. And it was this small town romance situation. So it was just this goofy thought that I started riffing on. And then that became the concept of the first novel. So this was something that I was writing honestly purely for me. I started like scribbling it on Google Docs and it felt very authentic to the way I wrote like fan fiction when I was a kid, where I was up at night just jotting down ideas for this story. And at a certain point in time, I went, oh, I actually love this. And I think Mothman, I've always loved monsters, I've always loved cryptids. And I think he really lent himself well to the sort of Beauty and the Beast story that I was interested in telling, where he's this misunderstood creature. No one really knows what his deal is, where he came from. And the cool thing about Mothman is there are so many different sightings, so many different interpretations where I really felt like he could be anything.
So tell me a little bit what that is.
So, Mothman is this giant winged creature who he was first spotted. I want to say, I'm going to get the date wrong. I was literally just on Eerie Travels talking with real Mothman experts about this. I want to say it was the late 60s.
Okay,
And I think the very, very first sighting was someone driving past doing road work, saw
that's
this
okay.
giant like muscular fur feather covered creature, winged creature that was stuck in barbed wire and trying to pull himself out
Okay.
and glided away. Like huge, like 7 foot creature at night with glowing eyes. And then the big sighting that everyone talks about is there was a couple driving down a back road and this strange, dark winged creature with glowing red eyes was chasing down their car. And the very, very famous one is there was a sighting at a horrible tragedy in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, a bridge
Mhm.
collapse where people saw him. And that's where he got this like harbinger of death lore where people
Okay.
like did he cause it? Was he warning them? Was it happenstance? And that's also a part of the story. And if you go to Point Pleasant in the museum, you really feel that heaviness of that tragedy. But he's become this pop culture figure in their town where there is a statue of the Mothman, there is a museum, there's a golf course, there's all sorts of merchandise, and he's really been like embraced. If you Google it, has a very pronounced butt. And
Okay.
so that's, I think, also the shiny hiney is what it is called because
Uh,
it's, and it's a whole thing. So he has all of this lore, a ton of sightings. You're not the only person who talking to me is your first Mothman introduction. My mom thought that I made up Mothman. And so when I told her I was going to the Mothman Festival in West Virginia, she got off the phone with me quick and it was a little strange. And then she called me back. So, Paige,
Mhm.
tell me about this festival in West Virginia. I'm like, yeah, Mom, it's the Mothman Festival. And she just paused and goes, for you? I thought the whole town was
Like,
having a festival in my honor. And I'm like, no, Mom, no.
that is
It was very
awesome.
cute.
Hmm. Yeah, that is awesome. Because when I first, um, I think of Mothman from The Watchmen was my first thought
Mm.
of that. So I'm going to go back just a little bit. You said you wanted to write. So what was the first novel you wrote? Was it a Mothman novel?
It's no, that's so different. This kind of
Okay.
my first novel, I can see it on my shelf. It has since been unpublished, but it was called Confidence, the Diary of an Invisible Girl. And it was about a geeky comic book fan who learns to be the main character in her own story. Very high school, very hijinks, really
Okay.
like a love letter to those books that I read when I was a teenager. And it was a lot of fun. It was a great learning experience. I feel like it's very 2012 in its references and stuff,
Okay.
which if ever it got back on shelves, it would need a big, either to need to be dated in that time or a
Hmm.
huge overhaul in the
Yeah.
editing. Yeah, and so that was my very first. And then I had
Mm.
a Frankenstein story that again is there's some copies floating out there. And then I also have two young adult novels. So before I got into Mothman, I was writing, and I actually didn't know when I started Mothman if it would be an adult novel or a young adult novel or where it would land. And the character just naturally was older, and the story also just lent itself well to being an adult story. And I can't even imagine it as a YA. It would be totally different. But I have a Hades and Persephone story, a retelling, and then a 1950s space adventure, which is very cutesy. It's a road trip through the stars to find her secret admirer.
I love the diversity. Was is there a reason why you wanted to go with, as you call it, cozy horror?
Cozy horror.
Okay.
I think I would call it cozy, like cozy paranormal, where there's
Paranormal.
still
Okay.
monsters and stuff, but
Okay.
it's definitely not scary. I think horror there
Okay.
needs to be.
Okay.
I think I've always really loved spooky stuff. Halloween is my favorite holiday, always has been. And I think there's something about monsters and vampires, that sort of misunderstood trope, and also putting them in everyday situations is so funny. So having Mothman in like a giant poncho with dark sunglasses and whatnot, trying to disguise himself at a diner, for me, that was like peak comedy in the first book. But yeah, it was really something that I felt like I was lacking on my bookshelves. A rom-com, but with a monster in it. That felt really novel to me. And it was something that still just gives me like a little kick when I'm writing it.
So I love that you said, I want to do a rom-com featuring
Yeah.
monsters.
Yeah. And there's a lot of monster romance out there. At the time that I was working on my Mothman one, there were a couple, but they were more in the very spicy space, which
Yeah.
love to see it. But I really
Yeah.
wanted something that felt more like the pacing of Hallmark or rom com. Mine are
Yeah.
still a little spicy, but I wanted more of that rom com pacing, is what I'll say.
And there is something sweet about the Hallmark movies,
Hmm.
right? One of my best friends, a guy named Tom Zoller, he, gosh, a long time ago now, but he was saying, I want to do a romantic superhero comic book.
Love that. Yeah.
So he came up with the idea that Mark, who is the Superman of this world called the Crusader, was in love with Abby, who owns a bookstore.
Hmm.
And he said the very first issue is, if I'm going to tell her I love her, I have to go all in and I have to tell her who I am. And the premise is he tells Abby that he loves her and he's also Crusader. And the premise, especially the first 4 or 5 issues, is what do you do when your boyfriend is the most powerful man in the universe? What do you get him from Christmas when he can take coals and make ice diamonds? And
Give him a little handmade card.
yes, she actually makes him a comic book
Yes. Cute.
because he never had his own comic book. In fact, the first joke he wrote was they were talking to the Aquaman character, and the Aquaman character says, Abby, how do you like fish? And she says, broiled. And he's Abby, this is Mark talking to him. They're his friends. He
It's really
talks to
funny.
them. And it sounds like also, not that you're aiming for 15-year-old Paige, but there are younger Pages and Jessies that they want that little bit. They want just a little bit of spice and a little bit of the monsters, and we all
Yeah,
can.
8+ for sure. I think 18-year-old
Oh, are
Paige
you?
would
Oh,
get the, yeah.
yeah. Okay.
18-year-old Paige would see these books though and
Yeah.
be, I was working, let me see, at 18, I was, I think, working at Hot Topic. Yeah, no, I would have been obsessed. I would have been absolutely obsessed with these Mothman
Nice.
books.
Did you know you wanted to do a series when you did the first one?
No. So I did the first one, I thought it was going to be a standalone.
So that
Open. I
most of
mean,
what you've done is standalone, right?
yeah, everything I'd done had been a standalone. And then whenever I was going to pitch to Four Horsemen, they liked my tweet, which was like a pit mad thing, which used to be a way that you could pitch to publishers. And I was on their website and I saw that they only took series. And I think I took a solid 48 hours and I was like, okay, if I were to expand this, would it add value to the stories? Do I see like an arc that could span more than one book? What are some of the themes I would put into the next two? Because I knew my tropes so well for the first book. I knew it was small town romance. I knew the pacing. Book two ended up being more like Secret Prince. And then book three is very much like the wedding episode. I thought of these very like on the nose titles where it's I'm in love with Mothman, I'm engaged to Mothman, I'm getting married to Mothman. And the third came out this past December, and it's just been like a joy to see. I never really knew that I would complete a series before. So it was just really exciting.
Yeah, and I love that page because story first, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea of going, okay, I could just say that, okay, if
Yeah,
that's
it's
going to help me get
totally a
promoted,
series.
is there enough substance in there to, if I'm going to do this, that I do it well?
Yeah, exactly. And I really wanted to make sure that if I was continuing on with the characters, each book would have the feeling of like enough is going on here where it almost could read. You need the context of the other ones, but it
Sure.
almost reads as a standalone in pacing wise. And I've always envisioned them when I'm writing, like they play cinematically when I'm writing a scene. I really wanted to make sure that it made sense.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Kickstarter. Yes, they're married. Yay! Now,
Yay!
Mothman has a baby. Is the
No,
fourth? Okay.
there will be a character that you meet in the third book is getting a spinoff. So that's really fun. But there will not be I'm having Mothman's baby.
Yeah. We joked. I had a wonderful friend named Sarah Hickman, who's a musician. And when she had her first child, she did an album. She really believed that parents should sing to their children.
Hmm.
And so she did an album called Newborn. And then she did Toddler, and then did Big Kids.
Big kids, high schoolers, middle schoolers.
Yeah, and that's what the joke is. Going off to college.
uh,
Currently hate you.
Empty nesters, and it's all
Yeah.
just nostalgic.
Yeah.
I think we're talking Kickstarter
No,
things.
but it's either Big Kids or Toddler. I think it's got to be Toddler, that every song is under a minute
Oh,
because
that's
toddlers have a
funny.
short attention span. So yeah. All right. So you've finished the trilogy,
Yes.
and so you've decided to celebrate. So talk to me a little bit about what this is.
Yes. So Four Horsemen approached me and they said, "Hey, we would love to do a special edition." And I was like, "Oh, okay, let's go." So
Yeah.
we got to planning and figuring out what would make sense. I had the pleasure of getting to like art direct a little bit, and then Valerie Willis is lovely, and with Four Horsemen, she's an author and also designer. She really took my doodles essentially and turned them into just something so beautiful. And then we had the same artist who did our cover art for our original covers. Laya Draws is her handle on Instagram. She did these wonderful character cameos on the back, and my idea for the cameos was almost for them to feel like royal wedding portraits.
Okay, sure.
And so we have Heather, who I haven't really talked about in this podcast. She's a burnt out social media influencer
Yes, tell
who
me.
she ditches her life online. She moves to the woods and Mothman lands on her roof. So she's a really compelling character for me. She went through such a journey in all three books. She also has the same chronic illness that I have. So I have Hashimoto's, it affects my thyroid, a lot of fatigue, can't have gluten or dairy. And I had never seen a protagonist that had the same chronic illness that I had. And I
Right.
really wanted just to see that in a book too, to have a character who just casually had this, because everything I'd ever seen it mentioned in the book was like a medical text or a way to manage it,
Yeah.
or, and that felt frustrating.
Yeah.
It's been the series, one of the surprising things that's been really lovely is having people who also have Hashimoto's or similar chronic illnesses reaching out to me and saying, I felt so seen in this character. And
Oh,
that's
that's
just
nice.
been really incredible. And that's like a thing this series has felt like such a like silly, goofy idea, but knowing that it could mean something to people has just been such
Yeah.
a special thing. So we have her on one cover, then we have Moth sipping tea from a teacup, and then their wedding portrait. So they're just like so beautifully redesigned inside and out. And I think they really celebrate very cottagecore, modern fairy tale aesthetic. And I'm obsessed with the designs. It has been since the time of recording this. I think we've been live for 3 days. In less than 24 hours, we hit halfway to our goal, which was just such an incredible thing. I just got a notice that said we're like Kickstarter, like one of the Kickstarter favorites or whatever that group is. Like,
Nice.
yeah. And so I'm very hopeful that it goes well. I've gotten the nicest messages from readers being like, I really need this to get backed because I want these books so bad. Yeah, I'm really hoping that it's something that we share with them through the month. Yeah, we're halfway to our goal, which means we have halfway to go. So I think we can,
Sure. So
yeah.
now what is the Kickstarter? What are you pushing to
Yes.
do?
Oh, have I not said what we have? We have special edition books. They're very
Okay.
fancy.
All
they,
right.
so they're redesigned covers. They're going to be hardcovers with the glossy text and stuff, sprayed edges, which I love on a bookshelf. And they're such a good, I think the term people are using is shelf trophy when you love a series and you want it.
Sure.
But we have a lot of stretch goals too, where if we hit a certain amount over our goal, it's like the interior could be in color or we could add more
Mhm.
illustrations. So they're already so lovely. And depending on where we get, they only get prettier. So it's really cool.
Now, is this just you wanted to try to celebrate and do something special for yourself and the readers?
This was something Four Horsemen, when they pitched it to me, it was exactly that, where it was the series is concluding. We would love to celebrate this book series coming to an end and do something really cool that your readers are going to love and that we would love for you to love too. So it's been really collaborative and a really neat way to work together and design something and also support some really cool independent artists.
Yeah.
Laia Draws did the cameos. We have stickers and bookmarks and all sorts of stuff that is all just like really lovingly curated.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's under Kickstarter, Mothman and Love Trilogy, the collector's edition. Now, it's going to be all three books.
All three books. Yeah, there are different options. So you can just get one book if you'd like to, but we have all three books. There's a loot box option where you could get a ring and a couple of other goodies. The ring says "My Flame" on it, which is what Moth calls Heather. That's his little name for her. Moth and a flame. We love it. There's all sorts of different options. If we hit different stretch goals too, I think the first stretch goal is everybody gets free ebooks, which would be lovely. The next one after that is everyone would get a preview of my next monster romance, which,
Mhm.
if you like swamp monsters in Florida and childhood best friends to falling in love, then that's going to be the one.
Good. So I was going to ask you, what's next for you? What's next for you creatively?
Creatively, I'm deep in edits for my Swamp Monster romance, where I haven't
Okay.
revealed the title yet. I feel like I'm like a day away from doing so because I just keep teasing it online. It's also going to be very on the nose, like the I'm in love with the Mothman books.
Hmm.
But I've had such a good time. One of my friends joked that I'm just handing out all my chronic illnesses like Halloween candy to my protagonist. So she has another one of mine, and it's been very cathartic to do that. I have psoriasis, and so she also has that. And yeah, I do feel like I've been flaring since writing this draft, though. So I'm like, maybe I need to just finish editing, and my that's the thing that's flaring it up. I don't know,
Yeah.
but it's been really fun to write.
Is there
Ooh.
something creativity wise that is in the back of your mind that you might like want to try sometime?
Do we when you're in the terms of books or like anything?
Anything. Both.
Hmm. Gosh, I've had the pleasure to get to play in a lot of creative fields. Like I've been in bands, I've been an extra in movies. If you watch The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, I'm behind the counter in the Miami scene. But
I love
let's
that
see. I'm thinking
series. And
about
how cool
it
is
was so
that?
fun. Yeah, if you look behind the counter, I'm not the person talking, but I'm next to the person. But let's see. If I'm thinking off the wall creative stuff, this is so silly, but my sister wants to a pop song and Lashes Lane, a burlesque sensation. I want to do that with her at some point in time. I want us to cut a little funny twin 90s pop song. But then in terms of books, I would love to get into comics in a writing capacity. I feel like that would be such a cool thing to get to do. I wrote web comics for, gosh, about a decade from when I was a teenager to in my early 20s. And I never really got the handle of the drawing part, but the writing taught me so much about pacing that it has been so helpful to this day. I really just want to keep writing these cute monster stories where I have these unexpected love interests, these fun classic tropes that you're just throwing a monster in the middle of. And I'm excited. I have 3 more planned out that I can't wait to get to write. I'm antsy to finish one so I can get on to the next one.
So, Paige, what should I have asked you that I haven't?
I have a question for you that I've
Please.
been wanting to ask. Okay, what song do you think we're bringing Bruce Springsteen back into it? He's been out of the room for too long.
Yeah.
What do you think if Mothman, and this can be you're new to Moth, so this might be, I was going to say go any Mothman you want to, but what would his favorite Bruce Springsteen song be?
So,
You're thinking a brooding monster in the forest. What's he
yeah,
listening to out there?
yeah. There is a song off Tunnel of Love, and it says, "It's Saturday night, and you're all dressed in blue. I've been watching you a while. Maybe you've been watching me too. So somebody ran out, left somebody's heart in a mess. If you're looking for love, honey, I'm tougher than the rest."
There you
Some,
go. That's
yeah,
it.
some guys, they want a handsome Dan or some good looking Joe on their arm. Some sweet girls like a sweet talking Romeo. Around here, baby, I learned you get what you can get. So if you're rough enough for love, honey, I'm tougher than the rest. The road is dark and it's a thin line. I want you to know I'll walk it for you anytime. Maybe your other boyfriends couldn't pass the test, but if you're rough and ready for love, honey, I'm tougher than the rest.
I think canonically he's just out there with like headphones on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Psyching himself
Yeah.
up to talk to
So,
Heather.
yeah, so you can Google It's Tougher Than the Rest. It's been covered by a fair amount of country artists. Bruce has a really good version. And so it really is, it's a beautiful love song. So that would be it. And
That's
so,
excellent. It fit in ways that I wasn't expecting.
yeah,
I'm impressed. Yeah,
yeah.
I had to ask the expert.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Hmm. Not New Jersey Devil, which is absolutely one of his worst songs ever. Uh,
No, yeah, that's not a cryptid that I feel
yeah.
that's a
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah. All right. So in a few minutes, I'm going to ask you for final thoughts and
Okay.
how people can reach you. But I end every podcast with the Mary question. And what that is, let's say you're a fan of Paige's works and you're checking out this podcast. Thank you. That means the world to me. So, Jay Armstrong, was a honors English teacher back in the Philadelphia area. He's now retired. But when he would teaching, he would give his students the lyrics to Thunder Road, the song from Bruce Springsteen, and they would read it as if it was a poem, and they would discuss the imagery Bruce explores, the themes he explores, and then he would ask his class at the end of the day, do you think Mary gets in the car? So, Paige, that was your homework. What do you think? Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
Here's the thing. I can't tell what he did.
Yes.
Because I'm like, I was like combing over the lyrics. And I'm like, what
Yeah.
is the whatever he did to be at odds in here somewhere?
Yeah, because he says, we ask her, Mary, climb in. This is a
Mm-hmm.
town full of losers. We're pulling out of here to win.
No, and
That doesn't mean necessarily she's going to, right?
I know, and I my first thought was yes, and then I was rereading, and I'm like, but what did he do? What's the vibe here? And also, is this one-sided? How does Mary feel about all of this?
Yes.
Yeah, it made me the second reread. I thought about bringing it back to books. My antagonist in book one of I'm in Love with Mothman, he thinks he's the hero of the story. He thinks that he's cool, gonna save the girl from the monster, and she's got a crush on him, and he has a crush on her, and he doesn't know he's the Gaston character, and she's falling in love with the monster. We know
Yeah.
she's not getting in the car. That's not happening. But I don't know. My first inclination when I read the lyrics was like, probably. I think she's getting in the car. So that
Okay.
was just the gut feeling. But then looking at the lyrics, I had more questions of who these people are. What did he do? Why do
Yeah.
I get the feeling he did something? Did he cheat? Because if he cheated, no.
Yeah.
No, she shouldn't. She shouldn't. I don't know if she
Yeah.
will, but she shouldn't.
Yeah. About 50 of my percent of my guests say yes, she gets in the car. The other 50% say no, she doesn't. And I think it's the idea, does he sell it enough that it's a good, right?
That's the thing, because I'm getting a little desperation here. And is it the sort of Hosier desperation where I don't know if you are a Hosier fan, but that yearning
Yeah.
where you're like that take me back yearning, or is this please? I'm undecided, but I feel there's like desperation, but there's a little bit of confidence.
And my wife would make the argument that they're settling. And then, of course, she always says, because there's the line, you ain't a beauty, but hey, you're all right. My
Don't
wife
like
goes,
that.
he's ugly. He's calling her ugly. Now,
Yeah.
my argument is that Mary, when talking about herself, always puts herself down. She always says, who would want me? Come, I'm no
Mm,
beauty. And in my mind, he's saying almost like a
like
salesperson would,
quoting her
yeah,
kind
with
of thing.
quoting and going,
I
but
can
that's
see
all right
that.
with me. And he's saying, I'm no hero that's understood. So good. I love that. All right, Paige, if someone wants to reach you, how can they? And once again, let's talk about the Kickstarter.
Okay. If you want to reach me, I am currently most active over on Instagram. It's Paige Lavoie author over there. And yeah, I post pretty much every day. A lot of fun Instagram stories, a lot of updates. But I would absolutely recommend going over to pagelavoie.com and joining my mailing list because that's where you're going to get book snippets. That's where you're going to find out about sales, what's coming out, what events I'm going to. I have a pretty stacked event calendar this year. And so would love to see you in person at any of those. Come over on my mailing list is going to be the best way to find out about what's coming up. And the Kickstarter. It's an all or nothing campaign, which means if we don't make our goal, the books will not be happening. And again, it's for the box set of special edition Mothman and Love books. And they're very beautiful. I definitely recommend going over to my Instagram where I have posted the full covers. So you can see all of the different book wraps and how they look and the artwork. And yeah, definitely, if you're not ready to back it, hit that button that says remind me of this so you don't miss out.
I think it's wonderful. I
You.
can't wait to check out some of the books and I will keep you posted. And I want to have you back sometime.
Oh, thanks. I would love to.
We can spend a whole episode talking about those unpublished songs and I
I
can,
would say we could do a whole Sound of Music episode.
there we go. I love that. All right, go to the website, check it out. I'm going to include a link to the Kickstarter. This was such a joy. Thank you for spending time with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Listeners, Everyone, be safe, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye. There we go, another episode. I'm about to go through a couple of things where you can reach me and give me feedback. So if you want to skip this, I understand. But I do hope you check it out every once in a while. I'm available on Twitter at Jesse Jackson DFW. The show is available at SetListingBruce. You can send me an email, setlistingbruce@gmail.com. You can send me a voicemail at 469-249-2442. I am currently doing a few other podcasts. Perfectly Good Podcast, John Hyatt from A to Z, where Sylvan Groth and I discuss every John Hyatt song in alphabetical order. My Babylon 5 podcast is Last Best Hope for Conversation, where Lou, Karen, and I discuss every episode of Babylon 5 in chronological order. I still am doing Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast with my brother in time, Charles Skaggs. And then finally, How Many Podcasts, the only podcast on the internet that counts, where my buddies and I discuss pop culture. You can go to our Patreon page and support the podcast for as little as $1 a month. You can go to our Facebook page, like, and please go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and leave a 5-star rating and review for all of the podcasts that I'm doing. It's okay if you don't listen to them, but if you subscribe and rate, it really will make my day better. Thank you, and I will talk to you soon. You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only, Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.